We are live. So, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are tuning in from. I'm Kate Luzio, the founder and CEO of Luminary, but also the host of Goaldigger here on LinkedIn Live. It's crazy because I started these in the beginning of the pandemic thinking that they would last a few months until we were all back in person. And here we are 2 years later. But it's also allowed me to get to know so many incredible leaders over the past 2 years and to bring that to a bigger audience here on LinkedIn. So today, I'm delighted to have Lisa Benally-Hannon, who is the president at Verisk Financial, who has an incredible resume and just a remarkable journey thus far, and it's nowhere near ending. So we're going to talk to Lisa just around number one, her path, how she found her way, how she found her voice, and more importantly, what she's doing for women in the workforce and what she's doing for herself. So welcome.
Thank you. So happy to be here. Such a great week in the week.
So happy to have you here. And I was thinking about this, Lisa. We got connected through Jim Giangrande.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is so unbelievable. He's also such a super connector. And I remember that first conversation and we were giggling about, oh, this is the pandemic. Hopefully in a few months, it'll all be over. And here we are 2 years later. So Jim, shout out to you for connecting us because now we have a great partnership with Lisa and Verisk Financial. But I'm going to really turn it over to you, Lisa, because one of the things we do on Goaldigger, every guest we have, is have them share a little of their story and how you built your career over time and where that led you to today.
Terrific. Happy to do that. We were chatting as we were getting started that it's a rare opportunity to have the chance to talk about yourself and reflect on your journey and particularly as it relates to female leadership and women in the workforce. And my journey's taken me and continues to take me very strongly in that direction. And so, thinking about that and preparing last night for today, I go all the way back to how did I really get started doing what I'm doing today? And in truth, I started business school a couple of years out of undergrad. Mm-hmm. I was a magazine writer. My first job out of college. It was a great job, really small magazine. I had to do 4 or 5 different jobs to get the magazine together. I mean, and it was like in a pre-internet world. So you typed your copy, you sent it out to the typesetter, you used X-Acto knives to set the type on boards, and then that got sent out to print in an ancient era. But I learned a lot, and I learned a lot not just about the subject matter and magazine publishing, but I learned a lot about kind of stepping out of your swim lane. Mm-hmm. And taking a risk, right? Like this was a small marketing magazine and I was there to write. And I ended up learning how to set copy and design layouts and interview guests. And, you just sort of, those opportunities were there because we were small and we all had to pitch in. And if you leaned into them, you learned a lot and you felt more and more comfortable putting more tools in your toolbox. After a couple of years of interviewing as a marketing magazine, and after a few years of interviewing marketing executives around the globe, I was like, I really like what they're doing. I'd like to go to school and learn how to do that work. So I went to NYU. I started part-time. Hadn't had a math class in a while. So that summer before my program started, I'm like, let me take a math course and brush up. But it wasn't full-time and I wasn't working at my old job anymore. So I literally went to the cork board in the career services, because again, it was a pre-internet world. I took an index card off the cork board for a part-time job at Citibank in their credit card division. And I really thought to myself, well, this will be fun until school starts full-time. Yeah. And then I'm going to go to school full-time. And I took a job in Citibank's credit card division in like 1987. And I have been on a path that job set me on ever since. That's a really long journey. Lots of tributaries on that river. But really, there were a lot of things I loved about it, right? So first of all, mid-'80s, cards are exploding. It's a very data-driven business. And it also has a human element. If you think about credit cards and how you use them, it's a financial instrument. It's a financial construct. There's an interest rate and you have a certain amount of minimum payment due. And those things are easy to analyze. But then we're all human. And how do we buy? What do we buy? How much do we put on credit cards as debit cards emerge? What do we do there? So this whole relationship of data and consumer behavior, unbeknownst to me at the time, was like this emerging theme in my career. And it's a journey that I've kind of stayed on. I went from that job to other jobs at Citibank. I had a few other jobs at, I got married, moved to Atlanta, worked for a credit reporting business in Atlanta, learned the business from a different angle, came back, went to work at another credit card company, large money center bank, took on some strategy jobs there. And in the midst of all that, over many years, there was a company emerging and being newly formed called Argus. And Argus was a subsidiary of MasterCard. And it was, designed to help banks understand, benchmark their performance. How am I doing versus my peers in a really competitive industry? And I was one of their first customers while I was managing strategy at Chase's card business, and stayed in touch with them over the years. That led me to work for them in 2008 at a time when my family was just entering high school. And for me, managing work and family has had different phases and different plateaus. I found it easier to lean into work when my children were babies and their needs were met and they had great daycare. A little bit harder when they started kindergarten and grade school and a lot of moms were around. And so I found a way to work part-time for a couple of years. And then when they started high school and had some freedom and could move around, Argus was 6 miles from my house. And so loved what they were doing. I went there to start a partnership part of the business, and it helped me balance work and family at that point in my career. And from Argus, we were acquired by Verisk. We've acquired a few other businesses into the financial services sector. I oversee those businesses, and I work on framing a strategy that helps all those businesses relate to each other in order to add unique data and analytics services at the intersection of payments and commerce, which is where we all behave. And the growth of that business has actually been spurred on by the pandemic, because if you think about our own relationship with payment and commerce, we're all locked down in our homes. And, what are we going to do? There's nowhere to eat. I mean, I don't cook that much, so cooking is not always an option. So you've got your phone and you open it up. You go to Amazon. You order your pet food and your paper towels and your Clorox, and you press your thumb. And sometimes those things show up at your house 2 hours later. That digitization of the payments ecosystem and commerce coming together and being ready for us when the pandemic hit, and then accelerated by our 2 years of it, has created really nice opportunities for a data and analytics business that sits at that intersection of payments and commerce. And that's what I do. That's been my journey.
So much there. I love to do this because I always have my questions prepared and then I forget all of those because usually in the beginning, I then write a bunch of notes and what takes it and not in a completely different direction. But I want to go back to a couple things you said, because you're preparing to go back to school. You're like, I'm going to get a part-time job. And had you not taken this part-time job at Citi, who knows?
It's a very good question. And honestly, not a question I've thought a lot about, because it was so early in my journey that I got on this path, and I've taken tributaries.
Yeah.
It's not been a straight line, like to the CEO office of the first bank I worked with. But when I've spoken at my college and at other forums where you're talking about career and career management, one of the things I've shared with folks is, the lessons that it taught me were a couple of things. One, go above and beyond, right? So that first job, I learned a lot, met a lot of people, interviewed a lot of people, which was great connections when I wanted a job in marketing. And then have a plan, but don't be so tightly wedded to it that you kind of can't see the forest for the trees. I was going to take a part-time job, and I loved the data. It was a very data-driven business before many businesses were. And so, I really thought I was going to get a job in classic packaged goods marketing, like the people who had the big money to spend on marketing, the P&Gs of the world.
P&Gs, right.
That was marketing. But guess what? Financial services turned out to be really good marketers. And I learned a lot, and I was and I try and express this to my children. who are young adults in the workforce, like I was part of a wave. I was part of the industry rising. And if you ever have the opportunity in your career to be part of the growth, the mega growth of an industry. So my son works for ESPN Plus, part of Disney streaming. Like there's an explosion happening there that he's part of. And that experience, it's not like you can always seek it out, but when you have the opportunity to seek it out, or when you're part of it, recognizing that you're part of that and exploring that, I think is really interesting. I was very fortunate at Citibank in my first job that turned into a full-time job there to have worked for a leader who said, we're in a moment. And he was, he was nearing the end of his career.
Right.
And I was at the beginning of mine, but I remember the room we were in, and his name was Jim Bailey. And I remember him saying, you are part of a moment. Our company, like the growth quarter over quarter, year over year, we couldn't grow, like we couldn't keep up with the growth.
Right.
And to have someone point out to you that you are part of a moment, you are part of a sea change. And I really didn't understand it at the time. I remember taking it in because he was so emphatic about it. But years later, I really still go back to that, town hall meeting and Jim standing there and saying, you may not appreciate it now, but I hope some point in your career, you will appreciate what this really is. And I do. And I encourage people to explore things that are changing the shape of our workforce, whether it be all remote or women's organizations or not-for-profit or private equity, whatever it may be, that's changing the way we work or how you gain your satisfaction from your career and your work. I think that looking for those moments, and you can't always find them, and that's okay. And you might be in a career where you're really well suited, like education, although even education is changing with technology. So that to me is also one of the big ahas looking back. Like when, I was part of an industry that was experiencing exponential growth, and that provided a lot of opportunities for me and many others.
But I think what you said earlier around, even if you don't realize, what you said when you heard Jim say you're in this moment, it didn't hit you until but what you heard from a leader was, take note, get involved, participate, and listen and learn. And so whether that realization comes later on in your career, and I feel the same too. I mean, I got recruited into banking. It wasn't anything that I thought I would do in my career. I remember saying I should have taken a math course before I took the job, saying, why would anyone, you know what, I'll try it. And I don't know if you knew this because
then you stayed there for a long time. So after you tried it, what was it about that really kept you there?
Well, I don't even know if we've ever talked about this, but my first job in banking was at MBNA in card services. And
I did not know that, by the way.
Yes, and then shortly after I joined, then Bank of America bought us. But I didn't understand the credit world. But to your point, and this is the early 2000s, it was wow. And they had started the affinity card side of the business, and it was a moment, right? It's why MBNA was so successful, and that's also why Bank of America wanted to buy them and then did. But the reason I think I stayed so long was there were it was three different banks, because it was Bank of America, it was JP Morgan, it was HSBC, the tributaries within those organizations. One, it was, I'm open to mobility, whether that's within the firm or even physically. And then two, it was looking at the leaders in those organizations that I was learning so much from. Yeah. I also, like you, when you think about, you were at Citi and then you were at Chase, you got exposure to incredible clients, which in your case ended up leading you went from they're a client to now you're actually working for that client.
Yeah. And just, and all of that, that ecosystem. I mean, as you're saying that, I'm thinking, those companies that you're mentioning, they're not like a manufacturer in the Midwest, which is great. We need that too. Right. They are countries, they are ecosystems in and of themselves. And I remember after Chase moved to Delaware.
Mm-hmm.
Chase and Bank One merged, and they moved their credit card operations to Delaware. And at that time, I chose not to go because my children were really settled and my family was here. And so I took a little time off, and then I went back to Citibank for a second tour of duty. And I was sort of that notion of having a plan but not being wedded to it. I was like, I'll go back to cards because there's an opportunity. It's what I know. It's what I love. But what else? Where can I go next? And
Right.
one of the things I had in mind was to go work for the Citibank, their philanthropic arm, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they were very focused on women's issues around the globe and education. And this is going back to like the mid 2000s, like 2005. But I really got there. I landed at my job and I said, I'm going to do this for a while, and I want to work my way up to working for the philanthropic part of Citibank, right? And I don't know how I'm going to do that yet. And I knew the woman that was in charge of that, but I had a notion that I wanted to move in that direction. And it didn't happen in that job, but the notion didn't go away. And it didn't happen in my next job, and it didn't even happen in this job. But I'm now at the point where I can use my voice to influence my company. So we're very focused this year on women's initiatives. And why? Well, because we used our data and analysis to understand the, equitability, as it were, of women in our company. Do we have enough women in technical jobs? Hard to keep women in technical jobs globally. Certainly my company and where we're located, we struggle with, if there are 50% women in the world, why don't we have 50% women in our company and equally distributed in all types of jobs? And we're not the only ones that struggle with that, but I really wanted to take that as a priority. It's not the only diversity and inclusion priority that we have, but it's one that was like just such low hanging fruit. You've got a female leader. I have a pretty well balanced leadership team. Why are we not doing more to kind of keep that growing just in our company? So we started partnering with Luminary, and we've done a couple of other things around the globe, but that's using my voice, to sort of say, this is an issue of importance to me. The data proves it's an issue that should be addressed. And so I'm going to use my ability to engage with an organization like Luminary that can provide networking and support for women as they grow their career. Do the same for my colleagues in India and around the globe. And so starting to find a way to contribute to that cause that's always been important to me. Women's issues like microfinance, microeconomy issues, and education. And as I sort of start to look at that next chapter of my life, not that it's today or tomorrow, but I always am looking 3 or 4 or 5 years ahead. I'm really starting to find opportunities, not-for-profit opportunities, volunteer opportunities that allow me to lean into that and to use my voice, whether it be to bring others to help donate to a really little ground roots movement about nerdy girls, and bringing girls who lean into work and technology in underprivileged areas the opportunity to experience what that's like, very grassroots, or working with larger not-for-profit organizations. That to me has been finding my voice, like settling on the things that I keep coming back to. What's important to me, and other than my work contributions.
Right.
And how do I express those and use my skills to put them out in the world?
So with everything that you're doing now, and what's wonderful is as a very senior leader, like you continue to mention about using your voice clearly throughout your career, Lisa, you found this voice, right? That and it helped to enable you to continue building your career, the tributaries. One of the questions that came in is, right now we are in a moment in time where you've had a significant, impact and on women in the workforce. Now we're the Great Resignation, and we talk about this every week. Women, particularly working mothers, right, are now have even a bigger disadvantage as we enter whatever the next phase of this looks like. You talked earlier about part-time. You took a kind of a step back in order to be there and manage that whole work-life thing. As you think about taking that time, whatever you think is a step back, lateral, How did that impact your career, and any advice you would give others that are in that place right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I mean, for me, it's a very personal journey. And so I try not to give advice, you should, or because
Mhm.
everybody's path, especially as it relates to, work, family, career balance is different. But what I share is my experience. And I always thought of it as like, I've expressed it as you're driving across the country, right? You're in New York, you want to get to San Diego.
Mhm.
And, there's a lot of routes you can take. Sometimes on that journey, I'm going to take the interstate highway. It's straight, I'm focused. And those periods, I would say I was focused on career. Like when my children were young, I could focus on work, really, kind of dive in, accelerate my career. And then there are other times when things happen in your personal life and your children are of a certain age, or maybe you take your foot off the gas a little bit, or you like stop at the roadside Americana, largest bowl of, yarn in the world, or, take the scenic route for a while. You're still on your journey, but you're just getting comfortable with what phase of that trip am I on.
Mhm.
I'm in a phase where I'm going to really stop a little bit, go a little bit slower. It's
Yeah.
okay. For me, that analogy always helped me make those trade offs.
Mhm.
And it's so tough. I mean, like I said, I have grown children. I still look back with, kind of a pang of, did I do enough? Was I there enough? And I worked really hard to strike that balance, but it's never easy for anyone to find that balance. I think the thing that helps, if you know yourself and if you're true to yourself, then, career is only an aspect of you,
Right.
and the home life is the foundation, it's the rock, and you kind of navigate more easily when you're really comfortable with your own skin.
No, I totally agree. And we hear this quite a bit, right? Everyone's journey is different, and you have to make the decisions that are the best for your path. I think there's just this, if you think back, right, gap in resume,
Yeah.
right? And
Well,
so
and
many women
I
have that.
wonder if that was a bit of a stigma. And I
Right.
wonder if you're seeing this, Kate. Like, to me, when we went through the first year of the pandemic and McKinsey did their study
Mhm.
where, 5 million women exited the workforce en masse in months, all of the same age, let's say a middle to upper management
Right.
level, right? Like these were women with children. And they were like, I cannot balance this. I cannot be the teacher, the principal, the homemaker, the business leader. I can't balance all that. And I would have lost my mind if I had children that had to learn remotely. Like
Right.
those women, I get it. But we lost a lot of women. And I felt of my year and my generation, like, did we just take such a step back? All the progress of 20, 30 years of my career and all the women that came before me, who really were the only women with a seat they were one among none,
Table. Right.
right?
Right.
It wasn't like they were 30% represented or 40% represented. They were one among 100 people, one woman in 100 business people. And that generation paved the way for me. And we've seen such progress in the past 20, 30 years. Did all that get wiped out in the pandemic? And that was my first reaction, right? And how are we going to rebuild this? Because if the women aren't there to get the promotion,
Right.
they're going to start to fall behind. But over the second year of the pandemic, I've started to think about that differently. Like, was that an opening in such a big way that that gap in your resume is not going to be the stigma it was anymore? And I don't know. I'm curious to know what you think about that. But have we created, like, did crisis create a change in mindset that was needed, so that
Well,
that gap isn't as important anymore? And maybe a lot of people are going to have a gap and it isn't a stigma going forward. I would hope, like, that second year gave me hope that we, because of all of this, that may have changed.
I'll give you, and I think you're right. I think there's the negative, 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 and then potentially even thinking about this this past second year around, companies being more flexible. The benefits are changing. Just the way we work is changing. I I think when they have leaders like you, absolutely. I don't think every company in every industry, in particular certain industries, are there yet
Yeah.
around this gap in resume. I think it also depends on the roles, right? I talked about this last week with a guest. I think what has to change is mindset and culture. And that's a great example. You've already that culture shift has already taken place in your mind as a leader. So you can implement that at the top level, and that comes down to other people managers and people leaders, right? Okay, great. This is not no longer going to be an issue. And also, let's focus on the skills. Let's focus on their past experience. And by the way, even if they took time off for whatever reason, that doesn't mean they don't deserve an opportunity. We're hearing a lot more about career comebacks. You know, I think if you've taken 10 years off, there's a comeback. If you've taken a year or two off because of what's happening, that's not a comeback. That is
I totally agree.
right?
Like I was just at the roadside, stop for a little while. I'm still on the road, right? I'm still on the road. I did not get off the road, build a house, and settle in the Midwest on my journey to San Diego. I just, stopped.
Yeah, and I think
stop for a few while.
Yeah, and I do think that there is, leaders have to start having these, more open conversations, and then rethinking their hiring practices, rethinking their hiring process, right? We're also seeing, companies are looking at how do they accelerate their hiring given the war on talent. But listen, I think it's a massive shift. I think that because we have had a second year and now we're into this third year, there will be more opportunities, and we have to, as women and underrepresented communities, right, really capitalize on that.
And kind of moving to the theme of finding your voice, I think being unapologetic for that is really important. Like it almost was a preconception that if I have a gap, I'm going to have to overcome the fact that I have a gap. And I think that if we just stand up and say, yeah, I took some time off.
Yes.
And like being a woman and managing work and family is tough. And by the way, it's not the same as being a man and managing work and family, by and large, right? There might be some families where the roles are reversed, or there might be families that are all female or all male. But in general, being a mother of a family who works is 2 jobs.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's exactly.
We should not apologize for that. And we should not apologize when we have to take a direction for ourselves that makes the most sense for us. Our skills are our skills. Work hard, do a really good job, learn, be curious.
Yeah.
And then the world is still your oyster, even if you took a break.
And for that kind of, if we don't do that, if we don't normalize that, if we don't become unapologetic with those 20, 30 years that we lost in the pandemic, become bigger, because the latest statistic is once a woman takes more than a year off completely, their salary decreases 40%.
Yeah. Right? And I don't want to minimize the problem. I think there is a challenge from what's happened in the past few years, because if there are less women in the workforce in these middle management levels, then let's be real, the men are going to get the promotions. They are the ones that are still there.
Exactly.
They didn't have to choose in en masse as women did, right? And because men get the promotion and bias is just human nature, there is something that we're going to really have to swim upstream against, because more men are going to get promoted in the next few years. They lean into what looks like them, whether they realize it or not. And so we're going to have to work really hard to swim back upstream.
Yeah, and create those same opportunities from a pay perspective, because the pay gap will continue to grow because of the exact problem that you just talked about. I know we're literally 1 minute at a time. I want to ask one more question that came in around from building your career. You're now in a very senior role, which is amazing. How important were relationships and mentors and sponsors? How important have they been throughout your journey?
They've been very important, right? I mean, and it's, for me, I would not say I ever had one mentor. I had, one of the things that I was really fortunate about is I had a lot of really good bosses. And, was it luck or was it lean? I'm not sure, but I was very fortunate to work for great people with integrity, different styles, and to build the relationship to stay in touch. And in doing that, there was never one person who's like, that's my mentor, and I go to them all the time. Right. But you just build, a personal board of directors, as it were, or many circles of influence on you, your being, your choices. And I like to think of it that way more, as like circles of influence and building relationships. And There's lots of tools for us to do that, but nothing's better than that face to face and just going and having a cup of coffee with someone, or being mindful of the people you meet and just reaching back out to make those connections stronger. That, as I look back, has been the most important thing, because the one mentor could help you on that one path. That's a very traditional way.
Right.
But having lots of mentors or lots of people who you lean to for different aspects of challenges and opportunities that you face along the way, I think has been more helpful to me.
I love that. And I love the term circles of influence, right? Because like you said, it's multiple, it's different relationships. Some are peer, some are senior, some are reverse mentoring, right? It's all of that. So,
and it's really fun when they start to overlap.
Exactly. I love that. I'm seeing that
you can make those connections for them to other circles.
Exactly. Well, Lisa, again, this time always goes by so fast. Thank you for coming on today. Thank you for everything that you're doing through your voice. Hopefully we can continue to amplify that, and certainly what you're doing at Verisk. We're at Verisk Financial. We're proud to be a partner with Luminary. I'm proud to know you and have gotten to know you during the pandemic. We've never met in person. Hopefully we can do that one-on-one coffee. And just, thank you for just using your voice and continuing to use your voice, not only for yourself, but everyone below you. And
it's so much fun to be here and talk about these things. And thank you for, having the courage to create Luminary. And it's a bold move, and we appreciate it. And we're all benefiting from that. And I really greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks again, and have a great weekend. We'll see you back here next week on Goaldigger. Everyone stay safe and stay healthy, and have a great one. Thanks again.
Take care.
Bye-bye.